Dawn Goldworm first, who is an internationally recognized olfactory expert and a nose for some of the world's most prestigious brands. Dawn spent over a decade designing perfume for celebrities such as Lady Gaga or David Beckham. She worked as the in-house fragrance designer at Coty, and during that time, she completed her graduate thesis at New York University on olfactory branding, which led to the formation of her company called 1229. Now, 1229 partners with brands such as Nike, American Express, Ritz, Bentley, Valentino, and many others to help in olfactory branding and evoke the power of smell to help communication of these various companies. Now, Dawn has been featured in many events, global conferences such as TEDx, C2, WD, Beauty Summit, and she's been also featured in CNN, Forbes, and the Wall Street Journal. So we are really delighted to have her in a few minutes talk to us about smell. The second guest today is Venky Murthy. Venky is currently the Leo Erikson Life Science Professor and Chair of the Department of Molecular and Cellular Biology. So Venky is not only my colleague, he's also my boss. And his laboratory explore the neuroscience and the computational basis of odor-guided behavior in terrestrial animal. Professor Murthy has a degree in mechanical engineering and bioengineering and a PhD in physiology and biophysics from the University of Washington. He then did postdoctoral training at the Salk Institute and then came to Harvard in 1999. So this evening, Venky and Dawn will provide us with two, I think, fascinating presentations that highlight their work on olfaction, on smell. And so we'll have the two presentations and then a discussion and the opportunity to engage in question and answer. So just to provide a very short introduction to this talk, olfaction is really a very special sense. It has an enormous evocative power. It evokes very strong and long-lasting emotions and memory in ways that are really different, both quantitatively and qualitatively different from other sensory modalities such as vision and audition. And so although humans don't have a sense of smell that is as powerful as other animals such as dog or mice, it has a particular importance for us, and particularly a very pleasurable importance in our life. And we all know this. We enjoy a variety of smell of foods. We also kind of sad when we have a cold and can't smell anything. So we're here to try to understand a little bit more of the science and the daily experience of smell. So please join me in first welcoming Venky, who will present first, and then followed by Dawn.
Thank you all for coming. So it's in a funny way, this is actually even more intimidating than talking to students at Harvard College, because then you're teaching them, and they're supposed to respect you and listen to you, and you're not supposed to do that. So we'll see. Also, the presentation, I think I've kept it very broad and general, because it's one of the I think problems with a lot of us scientists, including myself, is we tend to get into the nitty-gritty details very quickly and lose people. So you can ask me questions later on, but let me just keep it very broad. So let me start by pointing out the obvious, which is that smells arise when molecules sensed by your nose, right? There are other organs which also sense chemicals. I mean, typically animals have multiple organs, multiple bits of tissue that sense different chemicals, but the thing that we know as humans, smell, is basically stuff in the nose. And I have this animation done by a former postdoc who's now on the faculty in Seattle. It's a very beautiful animation. So you have a flower, let's say there's a wind that's carrying all these molecules. Instead of going along, oh, there's something else, there's another object. So we have a mixture of all of these chemicals coming from these objects. And here is a rodent, right? That's going to now smell the air. It's going to sniff in, just like us. Most mammals basically will take in the smells only when they sniff. If you don't take a breath, you really won't smell anything because diffusion is, it's too slow to get it. So inside the nose, this part is the nasal epithelium, which has the neurons which sense the molecules that you're taking in. So there's a huge collection of them. They then send electrical signals through those axons with colored wires into the brain. So this is now the olfactory bulb and the rest of the brain, right? So you are transducing chemicals out in the world into electrical signals, which is basically the currency of the brain, right? I mean, action potentials and electrical signals. And then once it gets to the brain, there's all these electrical signals going through, and that's basically going to give rise to your perception. So let's see, why doesn't... If you do any sort of search, you will see that most objects that are familiar to us, there are probably a few molecules, even sometimes just one, and they tend to be small chemicals because they need to be volatile. I mean, you don't really smell kind of pure plastic because it's giant polymer that's not volatilized, right? It's only the small molecules that are volatile that you're going to smell, which is why you swirl your wine before you drink it. So these fruits, they contain a specific one. You can see they're all organic molecules: carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, sometimes sulfur, which is usually not very good. And that's really giving rise to your smells. But natural odors, if you take a banana and if you now put it through basically something called GCMS, gas chromatography, just look for all the different chemicals, that's what you're going to get. So a banana, and a ripe and an unripe banana will have different chemicals. You have a lot of different peaks which correspond to specific chemicals, and they would all, you can actually go identify, chemists can go identify, and there are all these names, right? I mean, there's all this isobutyl acetate, pentyl valerate, all these, they're all small molecules, but there's a huge number of them, right? But it is not that the most abundant molecule, it is not that all the molecules that will give you the characteristic smell of banana. And in fact, it is so difficult now, and this is why I think perfumers have internalized this much more than us scientists, to say, okay, which of these molecules within an odor object are the ones that are important for humans to perceive, right? They can be very low abundance because you have a very sensitive receptor, let's say, for that, right? So I think, but the bottom line is that a single object, like an apple, banana, cheese, whatever, have many volatile molecules which collectively give rise to, for us to recognize that. But how, what are the molecules, what proportion and so on is the thing that we would like to understand. An easier thing to do is to take pure chemicals, and I can just buy them. Pure chemicals are easy to make, and you can buy them. So if you take, for example, a lot of these acids, small propanoic acid, those are basically the carbon chains, like in 3 carbons, 4 carbons, they're increasing, and there are various acids. And you can see associated with each of them, there's a characteristic descriptor that most humans will give. If you give this, they might say, oh, it smells kind of sour odor, right? And but the thing is, as you can see, these are all words, semantics. And if you are not an English speaker, if you speak, let's say Hindi, like what are the words would you give? But that's what we typically associate each molecule with. And let's say that instead of an acid, you have an alcohol, right? The same number of carbons. You have an alcohol instead of an acid. The descriptions become very different. In fact, as you probably know, many of you will know, small alcohols, other than methanol and ethanol are not so good to smell, but beyond that, they actually very quickly become kind of fruity, flavory, right? That's because natural objects which are fruity and flowery, this is what they're giving out. And so each of those give, but small changes in the molecular structure can actually change how you actually perceive it, right? And there's some commonality among different humans. I think Dawn will perhaps touch on it. But this is a question, right? How do you know that what I perceive the smell is the same as what you perceive in that, right? We have descriptors. So that's basically the idea that there are chemicals which can give rise to the perception. Just to touch a little bit tiny about the fragrance industry, why bother about all of these things? And there's a basic science question, because we would like to understand how do you take all of these collections of chemicals and make sense of the world. But maybe there's a commercial aspect, which is that let's say that there is something that's very rare, say musk smell, muscone. What if you could make a very cheap substitute that you can synthesize in the lab, which smells just like that? So you don't have to go off wherever you go to get the civet, deer or whatever, the muscone. And I'm told, and you can correct me, that there is something called cosmone, which was synthesized. It looks very similar, and that's basically now a cheaper version of the musk. And this, one of the, I don't know how many, 20 years old, this perfume from Givenchy was, I think, famous, at some point. Pineal. Chemicals get to the nose. What happens when the smells reach the nose? So that's, again, a drawing. So I've put attributions for where I kind of stole them from the internet. So the molecules there, I don't know if there's a pointer here, instead of me running over. No, okay. It's kind of obvious. So you have molecules coming from the flower, take in a breath. Some part of your epithelium in the nose contains neurons, not all of it. That part will sense the chemicals, and then again, as I said, send information. So what does that look like? If you take a cross-section now, this is from Wikipedia, you'll see that this is the nasal epithelium, this is the olfactory epithelium where there are actually neurons. This is all just other stuff that's preventing dirt and secreting mucus. These neurons send their axons through a bony plate there, called the cribriform plate, which is amazing, right? You have axons going through a bony plate into the first brain station, which is the olfactory bulb. And from then on, all the signals are basically now neural, right? I want to point out a couple of things here. One, that because these axons are going through this bony plate, is actually very vulnerable to injury. And I'm told one of the very common accidents, for example, when you have traumatic head going in, right, it's not uncommon to shear the whole thing off. Because imagine that your brain moves with respect to the bone, and you can basically shear off in motorcycle accidents, for example. And then this whole thing, so it's like your olfactory nerve being cut off there. And then you become anosmic, or you don't smell, or you smell very little. They can grow back under some conditions, but it's not clear that it's always going to do. That's one point. The other point is, if you notice, here's the tongue. The back of your mouth, through the mouth here, when you chew, these molecules can actually make their way back retronasally to your nasal epithelium. Why do I mention that? It's because many of you may not be aware, some of you anyway, that essentially all of what you consider flavor is smell. When you're eating, like all the complicated, beautiful flavors that you see, they're all smell. You can test yourself by closing your nose when you're eating, let's say, a vanilla ice cream or just a chocolate ice cream, and all you can taste is sweet, right, and the same texture. So essentially all of flavor, I would say, most if not all of flavor is smell, which is why if you're anosmic, if you have a problem with the nose, everything is unappetizing, right? It's just sweet or sour or bitter. There's no flavor, right? So that's another important factor for sort of humans. This is a particular thing for humans. So now going a little bit before I stop into the neural circuitry, that you have the sensory neurons. They send these axons, as I said, through this bony plate to the first brain station. And then, there are neural circuits. Neural circuits, for those of you who have not thought about it or haven't had the opportunity, you can think of them as sort of interconnected cells, right? You have a cell which receives information, a neuron, and then sends typically electrical information to a bunch of other cells. And these form a network. And the topology and the geometry and the organization of this network really is what gives rise to all of our perception thought. And they're not just in olfaction, but in sort of all of neuroscience. So these receptors, the number of them, how many types there are, varies wildly across animals. Humans have on the order of 400 types of these. To give you a comparison, most of you will have probably 3 types of photoreceptors, red, green, and blue. There's a non-color sensitive, right? So all of your color vision comes from 3 types. Some of you are dichromats, so you only have 2. In the olfactory system now, you have about 400. Mice have about 1,000 or more. Elephants have about 1,600 or something like that, right? So I think different animals, and there can be probably some comparisons of how many you have and how good you probably are at smell. So all of these chemicals that are coming in is sensed by this nose camera, if you will, right? We have all these neurons which are sensing the chemicals, all the different types. The combination of activity of these receptors is the information that's passed on to the rest of the brain. So this, I've started saying, like, if you're a mouse, sitting at a picnic, I guess, just a drawing, you have all of these chemicals coming from different objects. The mouse takes in a breath. all of these chemicals are coming in. The mouse is building the olfactory world in its brain, in its head now, right? Because all you have is a whole bunch of chemicals. You have to say, oh, those chemicals signify cheese. Those collections signify a cat. So that is the beauty, right? The brain is taking this information that's coming as just an array of receptors and then making sense of the world. This is also a common theme now in neuroscience, which is that we don't just mimic the world. We are reconstructing the world in our heads. So you have this sensory information. You are using your experience and your circuits, your whatever wiring, to kind of almost predict like what could have been there. Like, this is what I think it is there. So you have these smells and you're sort of saying, oh, I think this is what is out in the world. Sounds weird, but that's really what brains are always doing. So I'll end with this to make a transition to what Dawn will have to say, which is that what happens beyond this. So this part, it's a little bit easier to describe for me. I can give you the circuits, I can tell you receptors. Once the signal goes into the brain, then it's just going all over the place, like lots of different areas, a lot of interconnections, feedback loops. The one reason to put this picture, other than to just show that these things exist, is that these are parts of the brain that are called sort of the limbic system. And colloquially, we think of it as sort of the more emotional, memory-forming. So the olfactory signals very quickly get to what's called the limbic system, so the hippocampus, entorhinal cortex, and so on, which seem to be related to sort of emotion, memory, and so on. And which is why this part, I think for scientists, it's still very mysterious. How does it actually give? How do odors trigger memories? How do why do they evoke certain emotions? And all of those things. And I think there, perhaps, thinking about humans and the cognitive stuff, I think is probably going to help us understand. It's hard to study in animals, as you can imagine. So also a funny coincidence, it turns out tomorrow is Anosmia Awareness Day, right? And there is a group of people. So most people don't worry about lack of sense of smell. Like, why do you care? You just go about your world. If you're blind, if you're deaf, that seems to matter a lot more. Actually, I don't think that's true. I think if you cannot smell, if you're anosmic, there's a lot of evidence that actually leads to anhedonism. You're not as happy. Things are hard to enjoy. Maybe you don't have appetite. So anosmia is psychologically, emotionally an issue. So there's a group of people who have now created this anosmia awareness organization, and tomorrow, apparently February 27th, is the Anosmia Awareness Day. So you can go and look it up for some information. So I'm just going to stop there and turn it over to Dawn.
I was giving a talk a few years ago to an innovation team at a large advertising company. And my co-founder and I, you might have seen her in the audience, she looks very similar to me, brought up the topic of olfactive branding, which is the idea that the visceral language of scent can transform an emotional experience. And normally when we have this conversation, people are pretty captivated. It's kind of a novel, innovative approach to traditional marketing. But on this particular day, they were not interested in us. They were much more interested in their laptops or their little electronic devices, which most people are today, than the sound of our voices. So I decided to play a little game, and I asked the girl sitting closest to me where she was born and where she grew up. And she said quite proudly that she was born and raised in New York City. So I opened my coffret, which is a little box of ingredients that I carry around with me, and I dipped a blotter in a sample and I handed it to her. She put it under her nose, closed her eyes, and took a breath. And then she looked up at me, which is the most profound face of delight and joy, and said, "Oh my God, what is this? It smells like home." Now, what do you imagine that I gave to her? So most people think I gave her like cut grass or freshly baked cookies or lavender or vanilla, the normal smells associated with an American childhood. I gave her the smell of gasoline. What you might think is most amazing about that story is the smell of gasoline. What I think is most astounding about that experience was her visceral emotional reaction to the smell. This is a known, bad, polluting, negative smell that sparked the joy of childhood for her. Gasoline was literally her vehicle on the road to happiness. So before I was playing with gasoline, I worked for large fragrance manufacturers in New York and in Paris, and I worked with celebrities, as was mentioned, and fashion designers, creative directors, and large marketing teams. And I was always given the same 3 requests. 1, could I recreate the smell of their last holiday? Okay, probably. 2, could I recreate the smell of their childhood? Maybe. And 3, and this one was my favorite, could I recreate the smell of their baby? So I was young and I was eager. It was the beginning of my career, so I tried. I tried to source the ingredients from Thailand, from their last holiday, or recreate their experience of childhood on the English countryside. And no, I did not try to recreate the smell of their baby because, as I learned very early on in perfumery school, we cannot recreate the smell of humans, even the smallest ones. And as I worked through my trials and tribulations, sometimes I succeeded in doing this, and oftentimes I failed. But regardless of the outcome, I began to wonder why. Like, why were these people asking me to bottle their memories? Why? And so I decided to do some secondary research when I went back to school, when I went back to NYU graduate school. And what I discovered was basically what we hypothesize today, that our sense of smell is in the part of the brain that's also responsible for feeling and remembering. That the part of the brain that's responsible for olfactive cognition is also responsible for our ability to feel and to remember. I also learned that at 13 weeks, still inside of our mother, we have a fully developed sense of smell. And once we're born, it's our dominant and primary sense until we're 10 years old. The only other sense, if you can call it that, that's as fully developed at this time is emotion. And smell and emotion work together to help us to understand and create and comprehend this fascinating new world that we've been born into. And so that every time we have an emotional experience as a child, there's a smell present. And every time we encounter a new smell, we have a feeling about it. And like this, that smell and that emotion get housed together as one memory in our brain. And as such, our olfactive memory becomes the largest and most acute part of our memory during these 10 years of our life. When your mother's holding you as a child, you can smell her skin, her breast milk, maybe a perfume that she's wearing. You feel comforted, you feel safe. Smell, emotion stored, one memory. A little bit later, you're a toddler, you're running on the beach, you smell the sand, you smell the salty sea, the sea air, hopefully suntan lotion if you have responsible parents. You feel free, you're having a good time, you're having fun, you're happy. Smell and emotion stored as one memory. And like this over and over again throughout our childhood, our most important emotional experiences are tied to smell. And this creates the basis for the rest of our life. These smells at the time are multiple and varied. So we have the smells that we typically associate. We have the smells of nature, the beach, grass, dirt, animals. We also have the smells of pollution, suntan lotion, manufactured products, consumer products, laundry detergent, perfume, religious experiences, food. The list is endless. But all of these smells that we encounter during those 10 years are linked to an emotional memory, and thus create the basis for the smells you will like for the rest of your life, and also the smells that you will hate for the rest of your life. The challenge is, how do you communicate that? And so if I would have asked the girl who I gave the blotter to with gasoline to tell me the moment that she felt that joy, she would have been able to describe the entire scene of what she saw when she smelled that blotter. Just like if I was to give you a blotter and you were transported back to any memory of your childhood, you would be able to describe everything about it to me. She would have been able to tell us what the sky looked like that day, the people that she was with, the sounds of the cars, everything that happened, and specifically and very acutely how she felt during that moment, which I saw on her face as pure joy from childhood. But what she couldn't tell me is what she was smelling. because we don't consciously consume smell. She had no idea that the smell of gasoline was present until I gave it to her. And you all, unless you're having an experience or a prior memory that has to do with food and you're eating and you can tell me what you ate, or you're standing in grass and you know that you're smelling grass on the beach looking at lavender, you have no idea what you are unconsciously consuming as a smell. And this leaves the industry at a bit of an impasse. And for me specifically, it's a huge challenge for what I do, because how can I recreate your memories if you can't tell me what they smell like? And how can I create new smells for you if you can't describe the smells that you already know and like? It's a bit of a problem. We do a lot of research in the fragrance industry on hedonic olfactive preferences. So all of those preferences which are put into you for the first 10 years of your life, we test them later to see what you like and what you don't like. And you can tell us very clearly if you like something or if you don't like it. And if you like it, you will say it's fresh. It doesn't matter how spicy or heavy or intense that fragrance is. If you like it, it's fresh. But if you don't like it, it's too strong. That's all you can tell us, it's too strong. And it's because you can't close your nose, right? If you don't like something, it doesn't matter how transparent or soft or beautiful the smell is, it's too strong for you. But that's it. Outside of that, you're literally at a loss for words. And this is because the part of the brain that smells is not connected to the part of the brain that speaks. And I'll say that again because it's not your fault. And people ask me often when I'm talking about perfume, how do you have this vocabulary? It's learned, and I'll tell you that in a moment. For most people, you're not trained, and the part of your brain that smells is not connected to the part of your brain that speaks. And so when you're in perfumery school, they teach you what we called a borrowed language. So it's a language that's created through attributes from your other senses, from your sense of sight, hearing, taste, and texture. We use the attributes from these senses to create this borrowed language, and we build a bridge between the part of our brain that smells and the part of our brain that talks. During this time, we also look at color. Now, I am at a little bit of an unfair advantage, as is my co-founder. She's my identical twin sister, which is why we are both synesthetes. So we automatically and intuitively see color when we smell. But so do all of you. And not only do you see color when you smell, you all see the same colors. I did global research that shows with about 97% accuracy, everyone all over the world, regardless of culture, generation, or living environment, smells the same colors. So I read something just to finish up the other day that I wanted to share with you. And you might be more familiar with him than I am. It's a Nobel Peace Prize neuroscientist, Professor Eric R. Kendall. He found in his research that the inferior temporal cortex, which houses the color-biased regions of the brain, has a direct connection to the amygdala and the hippocampus. And as we know, because Venki mentioned, the amygdala, which I didn't reference directly, orchestrates emotion, and the hippocampus is concerned with memory. And because olfaction is processed in the same place, I am wondering through my research, could color be the hidden language to help us understand and communicate olfaction? Could color be a pathway to help us understand human behavior and emotion, and how we can use it to potentially construct the world through smell, and maybe make it a nicer place? So I think there's an incredible opportunity for the academic world and the fragrance industry to come together and partner and find a future together. There are smells around us at all times. If we could understand how these smells trigger emotion and influence behavior, we could actually use them as a tool. We create all manner of things in this world to make us look good and pretty and feel confident, but smell is the most natural and the most powerful way to make us feel good. Thank you.
I would like to ask a couple of questions to our two guests. And I think as a follow-up of what you just said, I would be curious to know from both you, Dawn, and Venki, how science of olfaction affects the science of fragrance, and how does fragrance affect your idea about the science of olfaction?
Maybe I can go first because I have a very brief answer. I think the one of the disconnects that, as neurobiologists, right, who actually want to go inside the brain and look at the kind of the physical structure and the physical and chemical structure of the brain, that we can do very sophisticated experiments in animals to really understand the neural circuitry and whatnot. But the most interesting things which Dawn referred to, which is like the idea of our perception, our emotion, what does it actually feel like? That's very, how do you ask a mouse or any other animal to tell you that? And it's going to be different anyway. So I think perhaps the thing that I'm most envious of at this point anyway is that the fragrance industry, I think because they've done so much testing over, I don't know, decades and hundreds of years, right? They have such internalized knowledge. Sadly, a lot of it is not published because they're often proprietary. So literally, I think there's probably experiments on millions of humans, right? So can you imagine all the data about so you can have in the data of big, in a big data era, right? So I think that's what I'm most envious of, that what I think academics, the scientists, if there's a way to sort of harness that just massive numbers of cognitive, the human experiments, then that I think can inspire us, and then we can go and start thinking about more specific actual biological questions.
There has been some research done recently, and I don't know how public it is, so I don't know if I can actually reference the names, but it was one of the leading fragrance houses partnered with a very profound and well-known institute to do this type of research, and opened up the floodgates of all the research that we've done over decades with this foundation. And the results are pretty incredible, and that's why I think we should continue to do this, to have more information. I think the way that I have personally benefited from the academic research that's out there is essentially, as I was saying, when I was still in Paris and I was wondering why I was getting asked to recreate the smell of people's babies. I get it, babies smell good, but really, you want me to go smell your baby? And so when I started to look, and this was quite a long time ago in my life, this was over 15 years ago that I was looking for this research, and it was really difficult to find, and a lot of it was just hypothesis. Now the academic research is easier to find. But it started getting my wheels turning about how scent can be just so much more than just a fragrance that we spray on skin. It can emotionally change an entire experience. It can be a form of brand communication. It can be, and it is there in the most profound moments of our life, but how can we use it to make those profound moments just a little bit easier maybe, or a little bit better, a little bit more comfortable, a little bit safer? So I think there's a huge opportunity going forward. I think we haven't even hit the tip of the iceberg yet.
Yeah, another very quick comment I would make, just because it's a good opportunity to say that. I think if all of you, when you take a smartphone, the idea of actually taking the visual world and capturing it in a camera and then recreating on the screen is by now so facile, right? It's just ridiculously easy and cheap, and you could just do that. Same thing with sound. You have microphones and speakers, right? So what's the equivalent for olfaction, right? Can you imagine that you have sensors which will tell you all or a large number of the molecules that are around, and have some sort of fragrance primaries which will then recreate that kind of, right? So you could have the equivalent of a camera and a display. So you would have a camera for chemicals and and essentially a display for that. That's something that I think probably a dream right now, but it would be cool.
That would be amazing. I know I lived in various different countries, and so what I would do, the smell of home is a thing. If you've ever not been home for a while and you come back home, you're like, and you take a deep breath, you're like, I'm home. You're not just doing that because you need to breathe. You probably don't need to breathe at all. You're just fine. You're breathing in the smell of your home, which is your comfort, your safety, the place that you rest your head. Well, I lived in lots of places, so I just scented my sisters, my brothers, my mothers. I scented everyone's house the same so that I could just smell like I was at home anywhere I went. So imagine if you could capture the smell and then recreate it. You could create the sense of comfort and safety or happiness or whatever you wanted in all different places and all different applications and things and spaces. It would be incredible.
So that brings another question, which is that it seems like in addition to the personal experience, the recreation of home or baby smell, the choice of a perfume is something very personal. And I wonder whether, perfume, fragrance is an art, and like art, there are different styles. There are styles of painting, there are styles of music. Are there also styles of perfume? And
I think I have a two-part answer to that. The first part is everyone thinks that they have a personal olfactive preference. You all think if I asked you if the person sitting next to you liked the same perfume as you do, you would say absolutely not, because I have my own opinion about perfume and mine is better, right? And that is wholly untrue. You do not have your own personal olfactive taste. Your taste is based on those first 10 years that we talked about, and it's based on your culture, your generation, and your living environment. So the way that I am able to create global perfumes for brands is that I olfactively pigeonhole large groups of people based on your generation, your culture, or your living environment. So I know exactly which smells you like and you don't like. And more importantly, I know which smells you like and you don't like that lead to different emotional experiences. So I can make you feel a certain way with a perfume. Now, when you put it on your skin, it's slightly different. It's more of a personal choice to apply it to your body, but the rules are the same. The game has just changed a little bit. There are different styles in perfume. We have various different styles. We know it as industry insiders because we create for different countries based on the different styles. You might know it now because Sephora and all of these different fragrance companies are giving quite a bit of information these days on whether you like a woody floral or a sheep or an oriental with fruit notes of I don't know what. But this is relatively new information that they're passing around, so you may or may not know what your olfactive preferences are there. But there are a lot of different styles.
Those choices change over time? Do we have a sense of what people a century or 2 centuries ago liked as perfume and how different they are from what we like now?
Absolutely, and that actually is because of science. And so Venki put a picture of a musk deer on there, and I don't know if we want to go into how we used to extract the smell of musk from deer, but it was not pleasant, I think, for the deer or the human that had to do it. And afterwards, the deers would often die. And so we don't do that anymore. And the deers got very smart because once they were captured, they stopped giving off the smell of musk because that's what attracts their mate. And so they realized once they were captured, if they didn't give the smell off, maybe they would survive. So we don't use animal products anymore, number one. Number two, there are far too many humans on this earth to only use natural ingredients. There would be nothing left. And so about I would say a century and a half ago, maybe a little bit longer, we started creating molecules so that we could have a very large and beautiful perfumer's palette. And so over the decades and now over a century, we've had vastly different types of ingredients that we can use in perfume, and it's changed amazingly from the beginning when it was just incense to talk to God, and that was a form of perfume, or milk that Cleopatra used to, bathe herself, all the way to today. And we have, depending on the fragrance house you work with, like 4,500 ingredients that we can play with that are safe and beautiful to create a perfume. So it will change, and it will continue to change because every day our global regulating body takes away more ingredients because they deem them not safe, or there's a natural disaster which takes away all of the patchouli or all of the vetiver, and so we have to work with it because when you're working with ingredients from the earth, things change quite regularly.
Thank you. So if there are questions from the audience, I think there will be microphones, and I would like question to be people using the microphone such that this can be recorded. So one question here.
Hi, I actually was just curious, you mentioned that it's impossible to recreate a human smell, and I was curious why that's the case, and also whether if you're able to manipulate with scent to the degree that it sounds like you are, if there's actually any research going on with sort of psychiatry or psychotherapy and scent.
So the reason that we can't recreate the smell of humans is simple. We haven't created the molecules to do so. We don't have the ingredients that are as subtle as the smell of you. However, we can recreate the smell of your body odor, which is wonderful, isn't it? It actually becomes very useful because when you sweat, it mixes with the bacteria on the surface of your skin, and that creates a new smell, which we actually can reproduce. We just can't recreate the smell of you when you're clean and fresh and new as a baby. And yes, there actually is a lot of testing and work being done in olfactive therapy, which I found fascinating, especially for people who have been in accidents and potentially lost their sense of smell or can't wake up from comas from accidents. And so they're triggering them with the smell of the accident to get them to start talking again or trying to get them conscious again. It's fascinating work. There's a lot more of it that's happened in recent years than since I studied it about 2 decades ago, but you should look into it if you're interested, and I think it's wonderful, and I hope it starts to be more and more popular.
Thank you. Question here? Yep, go ahead.
Is it on? Let's see. Doesn't sound like it's on. Okay, good. I don't know which of you would prefer to answer this, but if we're hardwired, during those first 10 years to only smell certain things, has research been done on things that other mammals, for example, can smell that we cannot, and found out why not? Because they might have survival advantage.
I have no idea. Thank you.
Thank you.
So I have almost no idea, but let me take a guess. So I think, it's very difficult to kind of exhaustively check all the chemicals to see what's like. I think this is why I think in the fragrance industry does it sort of empirically with humans. When we do animal experiments, like in our experiments, when we test 300 different chemicals, that seems like a large number, but that's like ridiculously small. So it's actually very difficult to exhaustively answer, is there something that one animal can absolutely smell and another one cannot? Certainly the sensitivity of certain chemicals is much, much higher, for example, in some animals compared to us. One of the things that I was puzzled by is we are exquisitely sensitive to the smell of something called geosmin. This is sort of the rain smell, like when it rains somewhere and there's this petrichor, right, smell. So that we apparently, for whatever reason, have it very small. Some animals have too. Fruit flies do that. But your question of is it only confined to those 10 years? I'm almost certain that's not the case. Even in animal studies where it's very clear that there's a very sensitive, critical period early on where learning is really, really good and fast. Even in those cases, I think as you get older, you can learn, but maybe not as efficiently. So I highly doubt that we stop necessarily forming more. It just those may be consolidated more readily, more strongly, more remotely, and so on.
But there's a difference between learning and having an association with an emotion, right? I think we can continue to learn, but maybe this won't have the impact that...
And this is very hard to study. I mean, how would we study this now in humans? Can we take a lot of 10-year-olds now and subject them to some smell and emotion, then come back?
I don't think we're allowed to.
You can't, exactly. That's the point. I mean, if you do it in animals, it's kind of hard. Like in a 1-year-old mouse, how do I ask, did you smell it 1 year ago? This such a thing. And so it's a very interesting question. And I think there's a lot of reality and mythology also about it. I think one of the slides that I took out was, many of you probably know that Proust wrote, these remembrances of things passed one's way, the famous Madeleine, right? I mean, he takes a bite of this Madeleine, and then he remembers his Aunt Leonie or something like that, right? Who gave dipped the Madeleine into lemon something ginger tea.
Oh, great tea.
Yeah, there you go. So
I don't know it at all.
Right? But the thing is that's a remote memory, but if the way he describes it, Proust describes it, it's all very landscapey, very visual, right? He talks about the town, right? It's not, as you pointed out, it's not the smell itself that you're remembering, but the association of the events. So clearly, even if artists have done this, it must be really a profound experience. So it's a good point. Maybe as an adult, you learn it, but maybe you just don't have emotions.
But yeah, so I think the reason that it's so profound in those first 10 years is because your sense of smell is the strongest in regards to your other sense. Once you're 10, they say that your sense of sight has kept up and it takes over. And that's why you're still having olfactive and emotional experiences. They're just not what you lead with. So as you get older, your sense of taste will change. And like Venki said, it's all smell. 85% of what you put in your mouth, you're smelling. The last 15% is all the sensation on your tongue. And if you close off your nose, you won't experience 85% of what you've just put in your mouth. So people that don't have a sense of smell really don't like food, along with a host of other issues that come up with that, as Venki mentioned, which is very sad. So if anyone ever asks you if you'd be bothered losing your sense of smell, you would be. You would absolutely would be. Horrible things happen. Your whole emotional side of your brain just starts to collapse, and you get very upset, and you don't live a full life anymore. But you can still have these olfactive emotional memories that can be formed as an adult. They just have to be a little bit profound. Like, I remember I dated this boy when I was 15, and his car always smelled like his perfume, which was Cool Water. And yeah, don't judge. And then, a few years later, I was in the mall. I think I was in a Macy's or something. I grew up in New Hampshire, so I'm happy to be home. And I was in a Macy's, and all of a sudden, I was down on my knees in a department store on a dirty floor. And I smelled his perfume, and we had broken up, and I didn't want to see him, and I didn't realize until I was like, oh, wow, I'm in the fragrance department. That's why I smelled this perfume. He's not here. Why am I on the floor? But it was such a behavioral response to thinking that he was around. This was years before I went to perfumery school. But so you can still have these kind of emotional responses as you get older. They're just not as multiple and not as intense as when, or maybe that was kind of intense, but really not as effective on you as you age.
I mean, it's interesting that when we cannot smell, it's true that we have an entire part of our experience and joy that is removed. And, most mutants that cannot smell are also, all sad in their cage and looking very depressed and doing very little. So it's maybe something very important for a positive emotion is the sense of smell. A question here? Could you please have a microphone?
Oh, somebody said
Oh, there was somebody.
Thank you.
Sorry, next up.
Yes, I was wondering if there is a way to enhance the olfactory capacity on one hand or protect it from not decaying too much.
So I don't know what you have found, but there is ways to do both. Protecting it, wear a helmet. That sounds really funny, but I'm 100% serious. If you do ride a bike, wear a helmet, because if you hit your head in a special way, as Venki was saying, if you damage that part of your brain, it's a problem. It doesn't really grow back. There are terrible stories of perfumers in the industry who have hit their head and lost their sense of smell. And sometimes I have that nightmare. So yes, wear a helmet if you ride a bike or if you do extreme sports. Try not to hit your head too often to keep your sense of smell. But to keep it active, you can do it on your own, really. You don't need someone in the industry. Just pay attention. When you're walking down the street, consciously indicate what you're smelling. If you're smelling gasoline, instead of just saying, oh, it's very polluted, you'll be like, oh, I'm smelling gasoline. You're connecting the two parts of your brain. If you're eating, say, oh, this is ginger, I love ginger. Oh, this is the herbs, I can smell the herbs. If you're drinking wine, if you like to drink, it's the same thing. So even on your day-to-day lives, when you're at home, let's say your apartment was just cleaned. You cleaned it. You left and came back. Oh, my apartment's cleaned. It smelled like lavender or bleach, whatever it may be. But, being conscious of the smells that you're consuming make your brain more actively involved in smelling and feeling. And so it just keeps your nose is like a muscle. So the more you use it, the stronger it gets. And you're always smelling. When you're playing tennis and you're hitting a ball against a wall, when you stop hitting that ball against the wall, the muscles in your arm are still working. They're just at rest. It's the same thing with your nose. If you're not consciously realizing you're smelling something, it doesn't mean you're not smelling. You're just not focusing on it. Your nose is at rest. And so if you focus on it more and more, you'll just continue to work that muscle and keep your sense of smell strong.
One small neurobiological factor says is the nasal epithelium, the neurons that sense the chemicals, they're one of the few neurons in the adult brain that actually constantly regenerate. And the idea is that they're exposed to the toxic outside world, and these neurons continuously die and they're regenerated. So I could imagine, not very much research is going on because, as I said, NIH and many other places don't think that this is an important sense but you can imagine ways of, as you get older, you get fewer and fewer, imagine a way to actually have them regenerate more. So you could biologically imagine kind of keeping up, if you will, in addition to kind of the training.
Yeah, and like I said earlier, there's a lot of the perfumers that they work until into their 80s, and their sense of smell is still 100%. Whereas most people, your sense of smell starts to decrease. So if you keep using it, it will keep regenerating.
Very impressive. Question here?
Can you speculate evolutionarily why we find floral scents pleasant. We don't eat flowers. Well,
Yeah, I think
not
Catherine may actually be a
often.
person to think about that. So it's a good question. So I simply don't know. I think the other people may know. Fruit makes a lot of sense, I think. Flowers, I don't know. Maybe they're related. A lot of alcohols. Oh. I mean, small, not drinking alcohol.
Well, what we know is that, most flowers give off, or I should say all flowers, give off a smell so that insects come and pollinate them. Right? And at different times of day, this happens. If it's jasmine or a rose, it happens during different types of days. So insects come and pollinate the flowers so that there's more flowers. There must be something, and I have not studied this, but there must be something that connects us to the insects where maybe we have this something similar in our receptors where we also find that smell very pleasant. But it wasn't always the case. And there are some cultures that don't like the smell of flowers as much as others. I, as a woman, for instance, I don't want to smell like a flower. I might be in the minority, but there are specific cultures that actually don't want to smell like flowers. But the majority of fragrances on the market today are florals. So you are correct. So maybe it has something to do with us being similar to the insects or the bees that pollinate.
But it's interesting
flowers.
because it's not only the smell of flowers that we like. We like the sight of flowers also. And so there's something, and it evokes maybe some type of beauty. And why do we like art? I think that's a more general question.
There are ingredients. If you look at jasmine, there's two parts of jasmine. One is benzyl acetate, and the other one is endol. Benzyl acetate smells like green banana. Endol smells like dirty hair. But together, it's beautiful because it's jasmine. So, with the natural ingredients, which, Venki showed on his chart, they're very complex. There's a lot of chemicals in there. So some of those chemicals we know and like and want to eat. And so if you take apart the different florals, even if you take apart rose has a mint component. It has from the geraniol, which is kind of rose and mint together. It has a peppery component, which with a slight clove note, which is, spices. So there's all these different chemicals within one floral that we actually do eat, now that I think about it. And enjoy, so maybe that's why.
Question here?
So you talk a lot about smell associated with emotions. So are you aware anybody has using this in the conflict situation to lower down the tension by providing this homey smell or whatever smell to make the person more comfortable?
I am very aware of people using smell in conflict situations, but not in the beautiful way you just described it.
The opposite, maybe.
The opposite. There's many defense departments around the world that have tried to harness smell as a tool in war, and it works. At first, it didn't. So you remember the stink bomb? Did you hear about that in the 1940s that America made against France? They made a stink bomb that smells like, as you would imagine, something so not so wonderful that comes out of a human. And they thought if they just threw this on the French army that everyone would just run away. But what they didn't take into consideration was cultural olfactive preferences. And not everyone is as scared of poop as Americans are. And so
French are not?
Yes, and the French are absolutely not. Exactly. I think that's far more normal. But we teach babies here to be scared of poop. We change their diaper. We say, ooh, stinky diaper. Ooh, you don't smell good. If we wouldn't say that to a child, the child's actually happy with poop. They play with it. They paint their walls, if you're lucky. And so they just threw these stink bombs on the French, hoping they'd run away, and nothing happened. They didn't go anywhere. Now, fast forward to today, and there are certain armies in the Middle East, as well as the U.S. Defense Department, that has figured out actually the smells that are bad and that do scare people. And there is one universal smell that everyone is scared of and runs away from, and that's the smell of a decaying body. And they use that as a war tactic. So yes, it's being used, but just not in the right way yet.
Not in a good way, maybe. Thank you. Question here?
Two questions, actually. One, there's been a cultural trend towards super stimuli, really loud music, for example, and then an awareness of hearing loss, which has become widespread. And there are things like limits to volume that you can put into your iPod or your phone or whatever. are there any kinds of concept of that in terms of perfumes? Because sometimes I run to people that they've like drunk the bottle of perfume or something. They're just overwhelming, and I just have to figure out where the wind is blowing and stay upwind. And I think they're honestly totally unaware because their sense of smell is just so overwhelmed. They have the equivalent of hearing loss. So I'm wondering what kinds of campaigns there have been or might be to make people aware of this, because it is serious. The second question is the health effects of some of these scents. Very famously, anybody who's studied chemistry knows that the so-called aromatics, which are very aromatic, and in fact a lot of them are used in perfumes, they're really chemicals based on the benzene ring, which is one of the first to be identified as a chemical carcinogen. And there are a lot of other health effects as well. So there's sort of a question of, I guess, concentration and overdoing it.
Before you answer, I would like to say something. You know, not only French people might not be that sensitive to the smell of poop, as you mentioned, and
Everyone
I'm French.
loves to talk about
but
poop.
something I noticed too is relate to your question is that in France, almost everyone wears perfumes, and you can smell it when you're in the subway and in the street, etc. And something very striking to me coming to the US is that there is this negative sense of people wearing perfume, which is something that you're expressing. So I'm very curious to know how you're gonna respond.
Okay, so the first thing is when you encounter someone that's overly perfumed, it's normally because they are now anosmic to their perfume, as we mentioned. It doesn't mean that they don't have a sense of smell. It's just that, you know, your sense of smell, and Venki can talk about this better than I can, is it's innate kind of survival instinct that we have, and it tells us when things are safe, right? So if we go into a situation, we smell all the new smells, and depending on the environment, between 5 minutes and an hour, we can't smell anything anymore. And that's our brain shutting off the constant need to smell everything around us because we're in a safe environment. The same thing happens with perfume. So if someone's been wearing a perfume for decades, they just can't smell it anymore. So they drown themselves in the bottle thinking that no one else can smell it either. They just need more friends. The second thing is there are a variety. So in the fragrance industry, everyone studies chemistry. You have to go to perfumery school, and you have to be in the industry. And there's a lot of chemists. That's how we create new molecules. The ingredients that come out of the ground are wholly different than the ingredients we end up using in an end perfume. When we extract an ingredient from an aromatic or a floral or any other ingredient, it is not safe for human consumption in that form. And so IFRA, which is our global regulating body, does a lot of testing to make sure that we can only use it at a very, very small level or eventually no level at all if they deem it not safe anymore. And they do a lot of testing based on that. We are an industry that is made for humans, so we want to make sure that we're as safe as possible for human consumption. And then, so Americans, you know, we're a tricky bunch. And we're always going after something. I mean, we can't go after the FDA because it's connected to the government, and I shouldn't talk about politics up here, but we don't get enough information, so we will eat so many chemicals, yet we won't spray them on our body. And going back to chemistry, we are chemicals, right? We are made of chemicals. And so there's a lot of negative press that perfume is causing cancer, that perfume is the devil. It's not. Everything that you put on your body has perfume in it, even if it says fragrance-free. The base chemicals that they use to make laundry detergent or bleach or any cleaning product or anything else smells horrible. You want it to have some perfume in it to cover those base smells. You really do. And those chemicals are far worse for you than anything pretty that we're going to put on top of it to make it a more pleasant experience. Our industry is so highly regulated that when I started, we had 4,500 ingredients. Some of the fragrances houses now only have 1,400 because they're constantly taking things away from us. So we're constantly trying to create new molecules so that we have things that are safe for human consumption. So Americans kind of go on tangents. I'm really hoping that you come around and attack something else next, and going back to smelling like France, because everyone smells really beautiful there, or like the Middle East, which is glorious. But most of the world uses perfume in the most profound ways for religious experiences, to feel more beautiful, to have more of an enjoyable experience. And it's really the US that seems to have this notion that fragrance is going to kill you. It will not kill you, it'll just make you smell a lot better.
I came across fragranceless flowers. Roses here have no smell whatsoever. And growing up in India, of course,
There's
we
no
have-
smell to the roses here.
Anyway, I echo you.
It doesn't make any sense. I don't know why the flowers don't smell here. Someone should talk to someone about that.
One question here, the microphone.
Thank you very much for your intervention. 5 years ago, coming back from Thailand, I arrived back to the US and I lost my sense of smell. My life has been previously very strongly attached to smell, one of it being a Chevalier des Vins from the Burgundy, another of it being the test of the opium smell of Saint Laurent. And it has been quite a traumatic experience. I've been searching for the last 5 years, anywhere I can find. My remembrance and memory of smell is still as intact. What's even more, there is one smell I can still decipher, and it is eucalyptus. So my question to you is where to go?
Thanks for sharing your experience.
I have to say that I'm deeply sorry that you lost your sense of smell. I know that must be really traumatic and difficult, but I'm happy that you can still smell some things. I would continue to search and try to smell everything. There are some fragrance houses that are open, if you're open to it as well, to doing testing, and they can show you lots of different ingredients and see what you can still smell and at what levels. And that could be quite fun for you. There's quite a few based in New York. I can give you some websites if you want, and you can talk to them. And that might be really interesting and really enjoyable for you to do.
Yeah, so there's also, this is something I've only come across very recently. There is an organization in the UK, they call it Absent, so it's spelled, I think, ABSCENT, UK. I think they're basically advertising for anosmia awareness, and also how can you train, can you rehabilitate if you have partial and so on. So I have no idea if they're any good or anything, but it sounds like a well-meaning organization that it might be worth looking into.
Thank you. One question here.
Are there certain aromas that actually are a protection for us, like support antioxidant abilities, like lemon and ginger or mint or thyme or anything like that?
So there is a lot of literature that suggests that different ingredients can do different things, and historically they have, to healing headaches, to having antioxidant properties, to, there's a very long list. There's even, literature which is more of a softer science, you can call it, and aromatic studies that say that different ingredients can make you, feel relaxed or stimulated. I can't speak to that because that's kind of not where I sit. So I don't really want to speak to it either way, but I think it's an interesting research that could be done. Historically, in different cultures, they've used natural ingredients and essential oils for exactly that. So there must be some truth to it. I don't know how many studies are going on now in that regard, though, not in the fragrance industry.
Thanks. Last question over there.
I'm 8 years old. And I'd like to know why I just don't like the smell of fruit.
Smell of fruit?
Any particular fruit that you don't like?
Apples, peaches, bananas, etc.
So you don't like any other fruit that smells?
Except raspberry and strawberries. Those are a few fruit that I do like.
But those don't smell, actually. They're a taste, not a smell. Yeah, unless you're in a different country. In the U.S., fruits like strawberries and blueberries and blackberries and cherries, you can't smell them until they're in your mouth. So maybe the smell of banana and apples and peaches is just too strong for you right now because your sense of smell is really delicate, and you might like them later. You know, try them again in a few years. But do you eat your vegetables? Okay, then we're good.
Good.